Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to this session on Copilot tuning. We are very excited to present some of the latest cutting edge tech, we believe the first in the industry to bring this capability and to 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀 Copilot. So today we'll talk about Copilot tuning, the product, how you can use it, and some action items for you. We'll do a deep dive on the product. We'll give you a demo of how the end-to-end system works. We'll also have a few customer case studies, and then we'll conclude. And hopefully we'll get time, a few minutes for question answers, but we are in our booth to answer a lot of your questions. So let us start by what are we doing? What's the big vision that we are after? So with AI, and many of you must be experiencing this, with AI, you hear a lot of people say that the vision of AI is it can help solve a lot of problems. It can do days or weeks of work in a matter of minutes or hours. The challenge, though, when you go try to use it in your company, it works for many things, but for a lot of core business needs, you see this thing that it is not talking like someone in your company. It doesn't think like someone in your company. It is a generalist AI, not a unique AI suited for your company. And that's what we are trying to address with the Copilot tuning product. So what is our North Star vision? What is it that we are after? So right now, a lot of the data in your enterprise might sit in 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. If it doesn't sit in 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, like SharePoint, OneDrive, you'll bring the data in using Copilot connectors. We'll bring all of that data in. And once that data comes in Substrate, it's in one place, we can then start abstracting metadata from that data. What do we mean by metadata? It's not just the data itself, but how was that data created? Who all collaborated? How is work done? What is success? We extract all of that information, and what we build is this thing which we call the enterprise brain. It's more than just a fine-tuned model. It's, of course, these large models, but fine-tuned based on your data and how that data was created, but is much more. It includes things like task recipes. Like, for example, you do different tasks, productivity tasks, like you create documents, you summarize, you do analysis of documents. Those are recipes that we built that is part of the enterprise brain. It also includes reward models. Reward models essentially is how is success measured? What is good for the enterprise is what we refer to as reward models. And finally, it also has ACLs. One of the key things in enterprise is security. One of the challenges with fine-tuning, and I'll get a little bit more into that, is when you fine-tune a model, the model learns the data on which it was trained. So a challenge with that is if you train the model on any of the data, everyone who has access to the model can then has access to the data. So one of the key things we built are these ACLs. In a sense, the model is only available to people who had access to the data. And this is something that we built as part of the enterprise brain. It doesn't just stop there. Once we build the brain, it is then available through 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 Copilot. You can go and create a declarative agent, and these agents could do different tasks in the enterprise. Things like document generation, summarization, expert QA, and many more. So in some sense, what we are building is this learn-it-all enterprise brain that knows everything that you know, and it talks like you, it thinks like you, and it works like you. So how does it work? When we say talks like you, it's basically supervised fine-tuning. I'll get a little bit into what is fine-tuning, how does that work. In some sense, if you're thinking of a legal firm, for example, what this means is it will have the same syntax, the semantics of the organization. In the future, it will start thinking like you. This is reasoning fine-tuning. By reasoning fine-tuning, it's things like O3, O4, O4 mini. These big models, when you run these models, they have this chain of thought. This chain of thought has been trained on all the data on the internet. What if you could change this chain of thought to think like how you get things done in the enterprise? For example, at Microsoft, when we want to get a task done, we'll say, go look at our OKRs, look at our Connect document. This is very specific to Microsoft. So how do you get these large reasoning models to start thinking like the enterprise? And finally, works like you, that it is not just stopping at individual models, but in the future, it's going to be these multiple agents. and how these agents talk to each other differs based on each enterprise. For example, again, giving the Microsoft example, there might be a product manager who does something, who writes a document, it goes to compliance, it goes back to engineering, back to the product manager, to marketing, and finally we get some work done. So this is a multi-agent system that is, again, enterprise specific. So our goal here is to take these large models, the way these large models are, and customize it for each enterprise. And we want to do it built on your experience and on your data. So the vision that we have, and this is a question that we ask ourselves, and many of you might be thinking about this, that will these large models become generalists so that you really don't need to customize to each enterprise? We don't think that's the future that we are headed into. Every enterprise will differentiate based on this brain, based on the way they do things. Like in the future, the way you do drug discovery or the way a consulting firm works, there is some unique IP, the unique tech that they have. And the more data they bring in, the more they train the models, the more their expertise is captured in this enterprise brain that then changes everything that they do based on that. So right now, many of you might have heard about fine-tuning. Just if you could just do a raise of hands, how many of you have actually fine-tuned a model? That's just a handful. How many of you have heard of fine-tuning? Many more. The goal of today's talk is to get all of you to start fine-tuning models. So what is fine-tuning? Just at a high level, right? Many of you have, some of you have done it, others have heard about it. So at a high level, when you take this large model, which could be billions, hundreds of billions of parameters, what if you could change the model weights based on examples? Like in the enterprise, if I could just take these really good examples of doing a certain task, you can then use it to change the weights. Of course, changing the weights is not easy. In order to do that, you require lots and lots of data scientists because you have to go in, you have to do hyperparameter tuning. There is a lot of expertise that goes in order to fine-tune and customize that model. So right now, the way people do it, if suppose you had to fine-tune a model, you would hire a group of data scientists, you would give them access to your most precious data, and then they would take a few weeks to a few months to customize a model that you could then try to light up for your enterprise scenarios. Our goal with Copilot tuning is to democratize fine-tuning. We want even subject matter experts, non-AI experts, to be able to fine-tune models. The way we do that, it is low code. It's built using Copilot Studio, so it's using embedded builder. It's self-serve and eyes off. That is, when you're fine-tuning when you're using Copilot tuning on your data, Microsoft doesn't get access to your data. No one sees the data. It is built exclusively for your enterprise. The entire fine-tuning is done within the M365 compliance boundary. So your data never leaves the M365 compliance boundary. We extract the data, we clean the data, and then we do the fine-tuning, all of that within the compliance boundary. And all of this is then available in M365 Copilot as declarative agents. And all of this is done in a way, which I was mentioning earlier, while respecting the access controls. That is, only people who had access to the data would have access to the model, to the fine-tuned model. And these permissions can then be changed by the IT administrator. You can govern it like all the other governance controls that you have when you use Microsoft Enterprise products. So just let me give you a bit of an idea of how the product works. How do we get to this vision of democratized fine-tuning? So we start with enterprise data. The first step that we have to do when fine-tuning a model is to prepare the data to fine-tune the model. That is, get the good examples. For example, suppose you want to do document creation for a legal scenario. Many of you, for example, in your enterprise, you create a lot of contracts. This is one of the customers that we are working with has this scenario. You create a lot of contracts. Each time, typically, you'll hire an external agency to go create that contracts. What if you could train your model with good samples of what is the input, for example, who's the supplier, what are some of the conditions, take the prior templates as input, and the output would be one of those contracts. And there are many such scenarios where you might come up with this. So, but how do you extract this good data to train the model is what happens in the data preparation phase. The other thing that happens here is we ingest the data. That is, your data could be in different places. It could be in SharePoint, OneDrive. It could be even in Snowflake or other places. We bring the data in through Copilot connectors. Once all of that data comes in, we then generate what we call a training set. That is, we extract these good samples, and then we use Azure Foundry, Foundry AI APIs to fine-tune these large models. Right now, what we are doing is 4.0. Very soon, you'll start seeing these reasoning models as well. And once the fine-tuning is done, we then check the results of the fine-tuning. Often, the first iteration won't be good enough. The subject matter expert needs to take a look to see, hey, does this look good? If it doesn't, you would rerun this a few times. And the output is then a model that is available for you to use in your declarative agent. So these are the different personas that would be involved right now in Copilot tuning. First is the AI admin. The AI admin, right now what we've announced is an early access program. This is available to enterprises that have over 5,000 Copilot seats. So the AI admin would go, they would accept the early access program terms. They would then authorize who's the model maker in the enterprise. There are few people who are allowed to build these models. The model maker would then specify their task and set up this configuration. They would also do data labeling and model evaluation. We'll talk a little bit about this when you see the demo. They would be the ones, the model maker would be the ones who will be building the fine-tuned model. Once the fine-tuned model is built, the DA author, the declarative agent author, will build that agent, and then it's available to the end users to start using these fine-tuned models. At a very high level, these are the different tasks that are done in order to build the fine-tuned model. So you'll have a model maker with a particular task in mind. The model maker could be many of you here if you're assigned by your IT admin to say, hey, go build the model. You don't need an AI ML expertise or a computer science degree in order to be a model maker. The model maker will come with a task in mind. You would say, hey, this is a task that my enterprise does a lot. It could be, I create these documents, or my job is to summarize a few things, or my job is to, write, for example, write papers. Whatever your job could be in your particular enterprise, be it in, or you could be looking at other people in your enterprise. Like, for example, one of them was, I want to write a sustainability report, which is a few thousand pages long. So how would you go? You take that task in mind. The next thing you'll do is you start with the fine-tuning UI, where you'll say, this is the task that I want to do, what are the different things that I need, the data that I need. After that, in the onboarding step, all the data is brought in to within the M365 compliance boundary. Then what we do, this is a proprietary step, this is something that we built in our group, is this data prep phase, where we'll take the data. A lot of times this data is noisy. Like, for example, one of the companies that we were working with, they had over 1 million documents of different types of drafts. A lot of drafts are not complete. A lot of the drafts are not even drafts. They're just emails or things like that. How from that, from like 1 million documents, how do you extract the few thousand samples that you're going to use to fine-tune the model? There, one of the key ideas we built is, I'll talk a little bit more about the tech, but we take, it essentially requires 10 to 100 samples where we'll tell a subject matter expert to say, does this look good? All they have to say is yes or no. You'll again see that in the demo. Once that data is labeled, we have that clean data, which then goes into this fine-tuning routine, where we have lots and lots of GPUs that are essentially running this fine-tuning process, creating that fine-tuned model. When the model is fine-tuned, you get an output of the evaluation results, where again, we want the subject matter expert. Like, for example, if it is a legal document, you probably want lawyers in your enterprise to come take a look. Does this look good? Or do you want, or is there any change that you need to do? Typically, the change you need to do is change the data. That's a feedback that you would give. You would then redo the data. And then it goes back. You'll fine-tune a few times. The output is a model that goes in the M365 model catalog. Once the model is ready, then you'd have an agent creator, someone who creates these declarative agents. Many of you might already be doing that in Copilot Studio. You would then create an agent. They would come with a final agent in mind, like, for example, a contract writer or an agreement writer. They will go, they will create that declarative agent, which is also available to your admin to then see and assign permissions to each of these components. One of the things I wanted to get a little bit deeper on was this data labeling piece. So that's the critical piece that is needed to fine-tune. Right now, it requires a lot of expertise to go and bring that high-quality data, make it available for fine-tuning. This paper, by the way, this is a paper that we wrote, which got published, and it's accepted in ICML, which is one of the top AI conferences, and with very good reviews. The reviews are open as well. You can go check the reviews, really strong reviews. And it's not just a paper, it's actually shipping in the product. So what does this thing do, Project 𝗲𝗲𝗀? Just to give you a little bit more background, our team gets inspired by these personalities. 𝗲𝗲𝗀, for example, was an artist who went blind. And even though he went blind in his 30s, he continued to paint and paint some amazing, amazing pieces. So the key idea behind 𝗲𝗲𝗀 is the following. Suppose you're given a lot of documents, a lot of data, which could be noisy. We are then able to take that data and come up with a data set which is clean to fine-tune your model. The way it operates is, I'll give you at a high level the intuition. For the details and the math, you'll have to go read the paper. The intuition is the following. Suppose I give you a lot of data. The first thing we do is we use AI to make a first pass. We say, take, say, GPT-4 and say, hey, go clean up all the data the best you can. It does a decent job. It'll get about 70% right, the first level of what AI does. And this is what is the state of the art. If you look at anyone else, this is what people do, and that's one of the common complaints. There are lots of papers talking about why that technique by itself doesn't work. Then we take the next step, and this is where the innovation comes in. Once you use AI to do the first pass on cleaning the entire data set, what we do then is we train a reward model on the data that is cleaned by the AI. And then what we plot is a distribution of the reward model, like what you're seeing on the top right. A key aspect of this distribution is that once you plot this distribution, it has an elbow and a knee. Anything to the left of the elbow is good data. Anything to the right of the knee is bad data. But then you have a slope between the elbow and the knee. The key insight that the team had was if you could have humans, subject matter experts, go and just label a few points at the elbow and the knee, you could then start making your reward model better and making the slope flatter. So what that means is you then suddenly have much more good quality data to train your fine-tuned model. In fact, what you're seeing here is working with one of our customers. Compared to just GPT-4, what it gave it, we got 3 times lower false positives when doing this with only 1.25% annotation. This was on 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗃 et al., their data set, which was hundreds of thousands of documents. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Kalyan to talk more about the product.
Hi, everyone. Ranveer just talked about his favorite part of the feature of the product, data prep. I'm going to talk about mine, a couple of them. So today, I'm going to introduce what we call as task-specific recipes or model recipes. These are designed for SMEs in your organizations. These might be marketers, compliance manager, or a lawyer at your firm, right? They are trying to accomplish a task, and they don't know anything about model fine-tuning. How can we arm them with simple techniques which allows them to train AI, not just use AI, but train AI? That's what these task-specific recipes are designed for. They are versatile. They are customizable for various tasks. And I'll demonstrate in my customer use case sections where you can see taking a basic recipe like doc generation or summarization or expert Q&A, you can do a lot of multitude of business operations and functions within your enterprises. The recipe abstracts all the complexity of model fine-tuning. You don't have to worry about learning rates, epochs, what have you, hyperparameters, what have you. The recipe is just click, 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 and labeling the data based on your SME expertise, and the model learns what the data that's within your enterprise and the expertise that's embedded in your enterprise. We also cover the entire workflow, like data preparation, fine-tuning, evaluation. You can actually see side by side how a tuned model and a tuned agent works against a non-tuned agent, right in the developer experience. And also there is a cool magic that happens in the inference as well. It's just not about training the model, but using the model in the right context and the right workflow within the agent. We take care of all of that as part of task recipes. To make it concrete, I will walk you through 3 recipes that we are announcing at Build. But imagine by end of the calendar year, or like my boss would say, maybe even sooner, we'll be launching about a dozen or so recipes. The first one I'll start with is doc generation task. Most of you might have done this. Let me click through this, which is pretty much you're trying to produce a high quality output document, right? This will have structure, formatting, deep expertise that's within your company. Imagine a lawyer, imagine a marketer. Let's take a marketer example. They're trying to produce a high performance marketing pitch for their client. That's the kind of document we're looking at. It has the expertise of the marketer, the branding, the style, all of that is embedded in the output document. And usually, this person may not start from a blank slate. They usually have a reference, a template, or the company's best practices, right? And the task at hand is to incorporate that client-specific matter into that reference or into that template, or it could be the deal-specific terms. Imagine you're doing a $100 million deal, and you're advising that client, so all the deal terms would be in the change document. In legal terminology, for example, we call that as a term sheet. In marketing, it might be called a best practice template, whatever that is. Those are your changes that are in your change document, and you're trying to conflate this. But anybody who has done this probably knows that it's just not copy-paste. You need to understand the nuances. You need to interpret the change and include them in the reference document. This is a task designed for subject matter experts. Now imagine if we could augment that human or subject matter expert with a model and an agent that understands the nuances of your reference documents or your precedents and your changes, right? Then that synergy between the human and the agent works magic. So, and this task generation, document generation recipe is designed to build a model that essentially understands the nuance of those reference documents and changes. Let's dive a little bit more deeper into that, how it works, right? Let's imagine this model, you use this doc generation recipe, and you build a model, and you integrated that model with an agent that Ranveer was referring to as like declarative agent or any of these agents that Copilot supports, right? How does this work? It just doesn't start writing text. It's, as you all know, using generative AI, it has a lot of hallucinations, right? So what we've designed, this recipe takes care of end-to-end. That's where this is, what I'm right now showing is about more of the inference workflow. When the agent is executing on your instruction, the first thing that it does is not start emitting text. It builds an outline. It reasons on your reference document and the change list and creates an outline, a plan, just like a human expert would do. Like, hey, what's the top level structure? What are the sections? What are the clauses that I need to include, right? So it builds that plan. And this plan is intelligent. It just doesn't take a reference document and extract the outline out of it. Because the changes might require, the changes that you're trying to incorporate into this reference document might involve removing some of the sections from the reference. Or it might have some specific nuances for this particular client and for this particular customer that the reference might not have been aware of. Because the reference might be a 2-year-old reference document, right? So the changes that you're incorporating needs to align with the outline. So essentially this is a reasoned, adaptive outline that gets created. Once the outline is generated, then we iteratively go section by section and generate that, right? The first thing that you'll see in the system prompt, we've included your reference document and term sheet and instructions. All of this was provided during the training phase. All of that is passed on to the agent as a system prompt. And then we build this document in a section by section manner. And when we build this, like the nth paragraph in the document, for example, the agent is aware of the conversation history that's happening between the agent and the document. And so essentially, all the previous paragraphs or sections that were created, the large language model or the tuned model is aware of that. This essentially makes sure that the document is internally consistent so that we are not generating text independent of each other, but the paragraph at the nth stage is aware of all the preceding paragraphs that were generated. This makes sure that the document is high quality and trustworthy. Net-net, if you use document generation recipe, you'll be able to create models and agents that produces drafts that align with your company's best practices, like which are captured in your reference documents or templates or previous work history. Imagine a senior partner has created a couple of drafts of say, a contract or a deal. You could use that and mimic that and customize that for your particular particular case. And the model treats the changes that are incorporated or the changes that you're giving as input to this agent as a source of truth. So this reduces hallucinations. And the way we do that, we have another interesting feature, what we call as guardrails as part of that. Because imagine the agent produces a 200-page document. How can you trust that this is a high-quality document that you can pass off to your client, right? So that's where we have these guardrails, which essentially a set of assertions that you would provide. For example, an assertion could be, hey, whatever interest rate was mentioned in the term sheet is actually used in the document throughout. We actually do that validation. Actually, the validations can be even more sophisticated. Imagine you're writing a contract, you're advising your customer on a deal, and you want to make sure you're representing the purchaser, right? So the terms of the deal should ensure that the power of balance is with the purchaser. So we actually can have guardrails that are as sophisticated as that. Where is the balance of power in this contract? Is it on the purchaser side or on the seller side, right? So we can have those guardrails embedded in the agent, and the agent essentially asserts for that. So that once you have this draft produced, you can validate that this document is actually trustworthy and reliable that you can share with your client. The second recipe that I'm going to introduce is what we call as expert Q&A. Many of you might be familiar with this, which is you use chatbot to do question and answer. But we have a different take or a more nuanced take on this. Because a lot of times in enterprise, the question and answer is not very generic. You want very precision, high quality answers. Imagine you are a compliance manager at the company. You are responsible for advising the stakeholders on whether this project is compliant or not, right? And you have a body of knowledge that you rely on to give expert advice. Now, we are designing this recipe for those folks who have high-quality, domain-specific data on which you want to produce high-quality, reasoned, and precision answers. And the way we do that here, just to unpack the magic behind it, we ask the subject matter experts, let's say this compliance manager, a series of questions, simple questions. Like, what is this data about? What are they trying to, what kind of questions one would ask on this data, right? For example, one of the real use cases that I've been working on with is like a telecom regulation Q&A, right? Here, the lawyers are advising other product managers and stakeholders on how to navigate the telecom rules and regulations, right? But the questions are usually country-specific. They are localized. And so telling the model, telling our recipe that, hey, the questions are around country-specific regulations helps us design synthetic or training data in such a manner that we can reason on this data on the country level, right? Not generic. Like we can say, hey, how does this regulation affect Poland versus Lithuania, right? So that could be a kind of question. If you give us examples of those during the training phase, we can actually design the model that can reason around those kind of questions. Another pattern that you could probably say is, I'm trying to do compare and contrast. Or I want to understand, like, are the terms in contract 1 versus contract 2, which is more conservative versus liberal, right? So I think the different styles of questions. So whatever the SMEs in your company want to do with that corpus of data, let us know through this recipe. And once we have that information, we use an agentic framework. Again, this was published by Microsoft Research. And we use that technique to essentially design the training data from your domain data and train the model. So out comes a trained model that now knows how to reason well on your domain-specific data. We don't stop at that. We have another trick up the sleeve. What if the data changes? Say, for example, you train this model, and 6 months from now, you have more new regulations, more information coming in. How does the agent keep updated with this, right? Do you have to retrain? Of course you can retrain, but we also have, the way we designed this recipe is, apart from a tuned model, we can also retrieve your more dynamic information. Maybe this information is in your inbox or in latest feed coming from your maybe Bloomberg or some other company that you're sourcing this data, this third-party data. All of that can be integrated. So the responses from your tuned model as well as data and answers from your more dynamic information can be retrieved through RAG, retrieval augmentation, and then we can combine and synthesize a more nuanced answer that's informed not just from your tuned model, but also from RAG sources. So touched upon DocGen Expert Q&A, and today I also have another recipe that I would like to talk about, the summarization. Imagine, again, this is a very common use case that I've seen across a lot of domains and industries. Here the customer is trying to do, let's start with an example. Right? Like here, I personally work with a litigator who's trying to summarize a court summary. This is a 200-page document, right, where the conversation between multiple parties in a court setting is happening. And typically what would happen in a law firm would be an associate would then synthesize that into a nice summary. And it's just not like less text, right? There is a nuance again there, right? The attorneys are looking for, hey, where was the judge excited? Where was the frown? And where was the judge asking for more evidence, right? Where are the contradictions in the testimony? Where were the contradictions, or where they were like, reinforcement of argument? So they're looking for this nuanced take on that 200-page document. And what is the best way? You can't prompt engineer this stuff into a model. The best way I've seen is give an example. Just like you hire a new hire in your company and you teach them, hey, this is how we do business here. This is how we write a summary. So if your SME has high quality examples of here's the input text and here was a summary, this is good. We can take that and convert that into a tuned model, and we can have an agent that does summary the way you want. It hones on what is important for your SME, for your business, and in the style that you want to incorporate. For example, should that be a bullet point? Should that be a paragraph? Should that be a narrative? Should that be a visual? All of that the model can learn and essentially imbibe your style. That's the summarization recipe I have for you. That's like the first, so Ranveer covered about data preparation. If I think about the pillars of this product, I would summarize as 3 big pillars. One is the data preparation. The second one is the task recipes. We talked about 3 of them today. There'll be more in the future. And the third pillar is about security and compliance. We take this really seriously at Microsoft. We know that you trust us with our data, and we make sure we handle that with respect and care, right? And all of the fine-tuning, all of the inferencing, everything is happening in the M365 trust boundary. Your data never leaves the boundary. All the processing is happening in an eyes-off manner, right? Nobody at Microsoft looks at your data, right? And we have what we call as tenant-isolated training and resource allocation. So all the resources that are dedicated for one tenant are separated out. And there's strict control of what moves from one workspace or project to other project, right? So that's on that. So I want you to be assured that this is a very secure, most secure on the planet. Second, I think Ranveer touched upon this, which is inferencing, right? We make sure the model that you build inherits the ACLs of the data. Now this can get complicated. Imagine if it was like a folder that had a series of files, and I trained that. Okay, the ACLs are easier to understand, and the model maker can assign that. But imagine if you're trying to fine-tune this model using a variety of data sources. Then it becomes a little bit complicated. How do I make sure the right set of people have access to this model? Don't worry about that. We have taken care of that. We will advise you as you go through the flow. What are the security groups that are eligible for accessing the model outputs? We make sure the ground truth of the ACLs on the data are preserved and flow all the way up to the model outputs. Right? We also suggest use security groups. So we can also help, because what happens is once you start selecting a lot of data, the scope of users in your tenant or in your company who can use the model outputs gets narrower and narrower because we want to avoid data oversharing. Right? Then we advise you on, hey, if you eliminate a few restricted files, maybe you can expand your security group or the set of users who can access this model output. So we give you these trade-offs as well. So it's not just like simple stats, but we're also being very intelligent about how you pack or what data you pack into the model so that you have the maximum coverage from a usage point of view as well. That's the second point. The third, I think also Ranveer touched upon, which is like the governance. This is an enterprise product, period. This is not a consumer product. This is an enterprise product. So we want to make sure as many model makers in the company can make models, but we also want to have central governance. We want to have the AI admin have a 360 view of what are all the enterprise models that are being built in my company, who has access to it, are there any bad models, should I be able to remove that? All those audit controls are available in M365 Admin Center. With that, I'll invite Khushboo for a quick demo and walkthrough of the product in real. Thanks.
All right. I hope everyone's ready for some demos. Let me log into my machine really quick. Are we good? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Khushboo, and I am an engineering manager at the Copilot tuning team. Today, I'll be walking through all the great experiences that we have built for AI admins, model makers, and information workers, and how simple we have made it for all of you to be able to fine-tune and leverage these models as part of your agents. So we'll start with the AI admin and look at how AI admins can accept EAP terms, authorize who can fine-tune models, and then also look at some of the governance aspects of model management. Then we'll look at the model maker experiences, where we have extended Copilot Studio for the first time to start fine-tuning models with a few simple clicks. Then we'll go into the DA author experience, where we will see how DA makers can leverage the agent builder, the familiar agent builder that most of you have already tried, and extend those with these fine-tuned models. And then we'll look at how end users can leverage these agents and simplify some of those highly complex business tasks. So let's start with the AI admin. We have introduced a Copilot tuning setting within the Copilot control system in M365 Admin Center. Here, once the AI admins accept the EAP terms, the first step is to authorize who can fine-tune these models. These are what we call as model makers. So here, I'm going to go ahead and add a model maker. AI admins will also retain control on and remove model makers in future. So from within the same setting, I can go ahead and remove another model maker. We have also introduced other governance aspects around model management, but we'll look at that in just a bit. Let's now, once the model makers are added via the AI Admin Center, we'll move on to the model maker persona and how they can use Microsoft Copilot Studio to fine-tune models. So here, model makers will be able to set up the configuration of their models and also go through the end-to-end Copilot tuning process with just a few clicks within Microsoft Copilot Studio. For this demo, I'm going to show a document generation task where I want to help a business development team draft new partner agreements. Here, the model will learn from an existing corpus of documents and then we'll use that to generate new partner agreements which match the tone, style, and guidelines of the organization. Once a model maker is listed to start to fine-tune models, they will receive a welcome email to get them access to Microsoft Copilot Studio. Then I can go ahead and get started. So this is our low-code, user-friendly interface within Copilot Studio, where I can start by creating my first model. So here I'll click Create Model. The first step is to describe and name your model. You want to make sure that the model you make it really user-friendly and it actually describes the purpose of the model, because this will eventually help other users in your organization to know what this model is fine-tuned for and what's the purpose. The next step is to add knowledge sources. Here, this will form the foundation of the model, foundational data that the model is going to be trained on. So once I try to add knowledge, here model makers can select from a catalog of available knowledge sources. Today we are starting with SharePoint, but we'll be extending support for Copilot connectors so that enterprises can bring their data to Microsoft 365 Graph and then start fine-tuning on top of that. So let's look at what's available in SharePoint for this particular use case. Here, when I go to Browse Files, I can see all the other SharePoint sites that are accessible to me. And I see there is this agreements folder, which contains all the previous agreements that my company has created. So I'm going to go ahead and select that as the basis of the model. All right. The next step is to grant permissions. As a model maker, I have full flexibility to choose who I want this model to be accessed by. Copilot tuning will ensure that any knowledge that is not accessible by these selected security groups is automatically filtered out before we start the fine-tuning process. So when I click Grant Permissions, I can either select only myself or I can select specific security groups. In this case, I'm going to select the LC team and the tech team. Okay. Moving on. The next step is to select the task type. As I discussed before, this is a document generation task, but you can also select other task types based on the model that you're training. I'm going to go ahead and select that. After I select the task type, the system will prompt me to answer a few simple questions that describe what the model is going to try to do. It's really important to accurately answer these questions because these act as cues to the system on how to interpret the underlying data. So let me give you an example of what that looks like for this particular use case. So the first question is, how should the system refer to original files? For me, that's precedent agreement documents. The next question is, how should the system refer to final files? For me, that's partner agreements. Then it asks me, okay, how should the system refer to files that describe what needs to be changed in the agreement documents? That's the key business decisions list. And finally, it asks me what guardrails you would like the system to evaluate the generated output for. For me, it's really important to keep it consistent to the terminology used in the precedent. So I can go ahead and type up that rule in pure natural language, and the system will know how to apply these guardrails to the generated outputs. And that's it. With that, we have configured this model to start the Copilot tuning process. So let's go ahead and click Start. Now, based on the data set size, this next process of processing your data can take up to 24 hours. And then model makers will get an email once the system is ready for action. But you can always come back to Copilot Studio and refresh and look at what's going on with your model workflow. Now let's dive deeper into what's happening behind the scenes in the Copilot tuning process. The first step is ACL analysis. We want to make sure that we analyze the document ACLs of the training corpus that you selected, and then filter out any knowledge that is not accessible to the security groups that were selected in the previous step. However, we know that this can get complicated very soon because organizations' knowledge is diverse and ACLs can diverge. So we make sure to provide you with additional security group recommendations. The goal for us is to maximize the coverage of the training data while balancing out who can actually access this model. Let me explain this with an example. So now that my model has done the ACL analysis step, I'll be prompted to select from a set of security groups. So the system says, based on my current selection of the 2 security groups that I selected in the first step, I'll have coverage of 95% of the knowledge. But the system also gives me 3 additional options. The first option, it says, if you expand your knowledge, if you expand the coverage of your model to 47 groups, the original coverage of the knowledge drops to 76%, but the benefit is that this model can be used by a lot more people in my organization. The next option balances this out, where it suggests me 4 security groups, and the coverage is still high at 88%. And the last one is the most restrictive option, where if I just scope down to that 1 security groups, I can cover 100% of the knowledge. We are also giving model makers hints on what files are actually getting included, and then which they can review by downloading this review excluded files debug info. But for now, for this demo, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with my current selection. The next step in the Copilot tuning process is automatic data preparation. As we discussed before, data preparation is a really complicated task which requires an army of data scientists to clean, analyze, and then iterate over the data, and then finally prepare the data that you will fine-tune on. We are greatly simplifying this process. We are using AI to make that first pass over your training data, but then we are also leveraging your domain expertise through data labeling to then train a reward model behind the scenes and then generate additional training samples from the data. That sounds a little bit complicated, but let's see what that actually looks like for model makers. Once the model maker set up the configuration, selected the security group, Copilot tuning process will internally start processing the data, make that first pass using AI, and generate a few samples of labeling tasks that the model maker will now need to label in Copilot Studio. They can come back to this interface and just click Label Data. For this document generation task, the Copilot tuning recipe mined the overall knowledge corpus and extracted a few samples of target documents that it thinks are good quality enough. Now, all the model maker has to do is assign yes or no labels by opening each of the documents, analyzing them for quality, and giving us a signal on whether these are high quality documents according to their organization standards. Once they provide the labels, they can hit submit from this simple interface. And really, that's it. Model maker just had to label a handful of samples through the simple UX, and Copilot tuning has done all the heavy lifting in the background to prepare, analyze, and clean your data according to the task at hand. Now, we can move on to the final step of training and evaluating the model. So I'm going to go ahead and start the model training. Once the model is in training, we will take the prepared data from the previous step, feed it into the model fine-tuning through Azure AI Foundry, and then once the model is fine-tuned, we will automatically generate evaluation results for that specific task that the user is trying to accomplish. These evaluation results will then be made available through Copilot Studio. The model makers can download these results and judge the quality of the model right from this canvas. They can always go back and iterate more on the model quality by adjusting the instructions or the data set that was selected, or if they're satisfied with the quality, they can go ahead and publish the model from this interface. Once the model is published, this gets deployed to an isolated and secure tenant catalog. From here, this model is only accessible to the security groups that were selected at the time of configuration. So now, let's move on to the information worker personas on how they can leverage these fine-tuned models as part of their agents. So the first persona we're going to cover is the DA author or the agent makers in your organization, and see how we have modified the agent making flow to start leveraging these fine-tuned models. So here I'm in the agent builder flow. I can go ahead and create an agent. Since my organization has enabled Copilot tuning and I have access to some models that were fine-tuned for me, I can go ahead and the system will prompt me to select from an available catalog of models. Here, I can go ahead and select partner agreement generation. And the rest of the interface is the same, where you would provide a name, a description, certain instructions for the agent, and then you could also adjust any startup prompts to tell the user how to use this agent, to tell the end user how to use this agent. From here, I can go ahead and click Create. Now let's look at how the end user can experience this fine-tuned model. They can use the startup prompt and then adjust the input files, and then hit Enter. And within a few minutes, I will be getting an email with the generated document output. I can open this document in Word, and as you can see, this model produced a 5-page document, which is a partner agreement in the exact form and terminology that my organization cares about. And really, that was it. With this simple interface, we automated a really complex business task of generating these complex agreement documents by fine-tuning a model through a super friendly user interface and then making it available through agents in M365. Now, we want to ensure AI admins have full control over what gets deployed and published in your enterprise. So we'll look at the final persona where how can AI admins see what models are getting published. They can always come back to the Copilot control system and look at the Copilot tuning setting. Here they'll be able to see all the models that are published, look at the model details. From this page, they can always override who has access to this model, or even remove any models that are not being used any further, or maybe they are misbehaving. And that's it. That's the end of my demo. As you all saw, we're really simplifying the process of fine-tuning, and we really hope that all of you give it a try, and we're curious to see what all you will build with it. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so that was a cool demo from Khushboo. But we know, like I think Khushboo showed how we could use a tuned agent in chat. But we know that work may not happen in chat. It happens in Word, SharePoint, PowerPoint, all the cool M365 apps. So I'm happy to announce that these tuned agents would be available natively in all our apps. And like, for example, here I have I have Word, where you will be able to select your own fine-tune agent that you went through this process and build a tune agent. It will be available. Here I'm showing like an agreement writer tuned model or an agent that you might have built that your SME will be able to start right in Word and get the outputs right there, right? So that's that. We're also working with SharePoint. So SharePoint also is going to bring tuned agents. So I don't know how many of you have already used SharePoint agents where you can build an agent on a site or a folder. In a couple of months, we will have SharePoint agents that can be tuned on that data as well with recipes that ship as part of the Copilot tuning, right? And that's not it. We're also having these tuned agents in our first-party apps as well, first-party agents as well. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with an agreements agent. This is a complete vertical solution from Microsoft which allows you to manage your agreements for your enterprise. So as part of that, we'll also be able to bring your tuned agents into that agreements app as well. Right? So all of your tune agents will show up in your flow of work. That's the main point I want to drive. Quickly, I also want to touch about a few customer use cases. The main point I want to drive is the versatility of these recipes. Today we introduced you 3 recipes, but the kind of scenarios that's unlocking in the marketplace is enormous. So I'll quickly go over like 5 use cases. We're working with one of the premier law firms in Canada, which is 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. One of the things that they prize most is what we call as the principal agreement documents. These are documents that span like 50 to 500 page in length, and they're usually covering agreements between 2 parties worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right, or Canadian dollars. How do we make sure we help those associates and senior lawyers drafting them? So we build, in partnership with them, a tuned agent that produces high-quality drafts, and it's right now in pilot use at 𝗦𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀. Right? And we're also working in a bunch of other use cases, but this is the one that I would like to introduce. We're also working with Ernst & Young, one of the premier consulting company that advises clients on complex task matters. Again, here, the most important outcome for the business is to provide their clients with high-quality tax advice. So we have tuned a language model for them using the Copilot tuning approach, which trains on EY's proprietary tax expertise and data. And along with that, in my introduction to Task we talked about RAG as well. So this agent not only uses the EY's expert language model, but also the RAG for more dynamic information. Think of conversation between the client and the EY consultant. All of that is in an email or from running documents. All of that can be used by the agent to advise. And so it not only generates an answer, so this is essentially using the expert Q&A recipe. And it not only, we don't stop at that. We don't just create an answer, but the potential is then to route that to a drafting agent, which then converts that answer into a draft that the EY consultant could share with their client. Right? So that's a multi-agent flow where you first call the expert Q&A agent, followed by a doc generation agent that combines the output and then sends it to the client. The third customer that I would like use case to talk about is Land O'Lakes. This is again a premier agriculture company. They manage a large number of diverse contracts. the challenge across suppliers, distributors, land management. So the contracts are like expansive and versatile, very. I would say they're very non-standard. And so the complexity the firm faces is to have a domain expert who can master all those contracts. And as you can imagine, when an employee leaves, there's a vacuum, and it's very hard to measure the performance of those contract negotiations or agreements, right? So we built a tuned contract expert that basically provides expert advice or expert answers on that contract data. Right, so that again, this is built on the expert Q&A recipe that we have designed. Finally, there are a couple of use cases from within Microsoft as well, who are adopting early adopters of this Copilot tuning. Microsoft HR fields a lot of questions from employees about policies and benefits. Right, so we have tuned a model on Microsoft HR data, and are able to policy data, not personal data, just policy data. And this can basically provide answers which are authoritative, precise, and more importantly, in the tone that we want our employees to be addressed with, right? So it has an empathetic tone as well. So you can customize this recipe to provide not just precise and accurate and grounded answers, but in the tone that you want. Right? And pretty soon, this will be integrated in Microsoft's first-party agent called Employee Self-Serve as well. So if you're using Employee Self-Serve, watch out for tuned models within that agent. And Microsoft Legal is also adopting our technology internally. I think I referred to that as a telecom regulation use case. So there's a set of attorneys at Microsoft who specialize on telecom regulations, and they get questions from all over the Microsoft on and advice. Seeking advice on how to navigate telecom regulations. It's a small team, and they need help. And they turn to Copilot Tuning to help build an expert Q&A system that accurately reasons and provides precision answers on this complex and nuanced telecom regulations. If you use search or if you use RAG, the model starts to hallucinate because the regulations in Poland or Lithuania are very, very similar, right? And we want the expert model to understand the nuances between those two countries and how these regulations minutely differ between those two countries and provide precision answers. So those were the use cases. So to wrap up, if you have complex reasoning on your domain-specific information, you should use expert Q&A recipe. If you're trying to produce highly structured and complex documents, doc generation recipe is the one that you would look at. And if you're trying to summarize high volume of content, whether it's multiple documents or a large document into a succinct report that you would like to send to your management or to your client or to a colleague down in the next department, summarization would be the recipe to choose for. There will be more recipes coming, so stay tuned. And with that, I will invite Ranveer back on stage.
Thank you, Kalyan. So hope you all saw. Now, all of you, many of you who raised hands, who knew about fine-tuning, wanted to fine-tune, but had never done so, we believe now you can. You can go within M365. You can do it in a secure, turnkey way. You can create these fine-tuned models. One of the questions you might ask is, when should you fine-tune? The three guidance we give is, number one, existing Copilot should not be good enough for your task. If it is, just use the existing Copilot. You don't need to go fine-tune. The second, it should be a high-value task. Fine-tuning is not cheap. As Khushboo said, it might take up to 24 hours to fine-tune. So use it for these high-value tasks. And the number three guidance is you should have good data to fine-tune. You should have data to teach the model. If these three are true, they are high value, you have the data, and existing Copilot doesn't work, go fine-tune, and we've made it really easy with such a complicated AI technique and make it democratized for you to use. So we have certain asks for you. This feature lights up mid-June. Please reach out to your AI admin or the Microsoft account team, envision these high-value use cases, and get in touch with us. Scan this QR code. There are a few questions. As Kalyan mentioned, we are going with 3 use cases. Very soon, we want to get to 10. And we want to light up the ones that are most important for you. So please reach out to us. Tell us, what are these use cases of fine-tuning that you really care about, that are highly important for your business? That said, to conclude, we are going towards this long-term vision where AI fine-tuning is going to get democratized. We believe that every enterprise for many of the high-value tasks are going to use many of these fine-tuned models. In our experiments, anytime you bring expert data, the expert model is always better than the generalist. And enterprises need to get to that expert. 80% is not good enough. You want to get to those 100%, 99% results, and fine-tuning can help. So help us get you and get all the other enterprises to that vision. Thank you.